According to U.S. Department of Labor report, children in the Democratic Republic of Congo are engaged in child labor and forced mining. Children are also forcibly recruited by armed groups, thus including through abduction for use in armed conflict. The U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, Stephen Feldstein, recently returned from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where he met with civil society representatives and government officials. Well, Secretary Feldstein joins us today in studio to tell us more about his trip and meetings in the DRC. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, not long ago, you came back, as we mentioned. How was your trip? You were there at a very critical time.
I was there for a week. It was a very interesting moment, especially because on the Tuesday where I was there was widespread shutdowns called Ville Morte that happened throughout the country. So I was able to kind of witness the effect of that, to meet with people throughout the day and to better understand what that might have on the political process going forward.
Yes, and you met with both sides, the civil society, and you met the government officials. What did the two different groups tell you?
Well, there was a lot of concern, especially leading up to the Tuesday events, about what that would mean. And so the government made it very clear that they would not tolerate any instances of violence. And the opposition, civil society, made very clear that they were very committed to holding peaceful, nonviolent actions.
And we know they're concerned so much about, especially the extension of President Kabila's rule. Is that something that came up in the civil society's conversations? And did they ask the U.S. to do anything very specific?
Well, in fact, that was one of the main points of the whole trip, was really to talk about the electoral timetable and to talk about how and when elections may be able to happen in line with the Constitution. So both sides had very clear messages about that. In the opposition and civil society in particular, they said, look, we are concerned that the right preparations haven't taken place so that we can actually have elections in a very complicated, very large country in November. And what we said is that we are supportive of doing whatever we can as an international community to encourage the government to hold these elections on time in a peaceful manner.
Yes. Now, Secretary Feldstein, Congo, DRC, is almost synonymous with child labor, child soldiers. How did you address that issue when you were there?
Well, we are aware there's many different human rights concerns, and I think one of the challenges with the Congo, in particular, is where you want to focus your efforts and what you want to specifically focus on, because there's so many things to really discuss. Those are issues that we are actively tracking and working on from Washington, and certainly through our embassy. But for my trip, I was really focused on two things. Number one, the electoral timetable issue. Are elections going to be held on time in line with the Constitution? Number two, is there enough political space for opposition, civil society to campaign and have free expression? Because that is something that for us was extremely concerning. In fact, I can say that while I was there on my trip, several different people, representatives from civil society, were arrested and sentenced to prison terms, really for little else other than saying we want to have a peaceful succession when it comes to the country. So those are the two things that I really focused on while over there.
And we know that in the past, the opposition has really, complained very loudly that the space has always shrunk. They feel that it's even more now. The question is, what is it, or what more can the U.S. do to push the authorities there to open up a little bit, not only for the opposition, but even for journalists, for the media, so that people can have a fair play?
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of different things and tools that we have at our disposal. One of the things certainly is the power of persuasion and the voice of the United States. And so we have issued many public statements, including a public statement while I was out on the trip that said we're concerned about detentions and arrests and that freedom of expression is one of the paramount principles that need to be protected. But another thing I would also mention is this. The week before my trip, so in the first week of February, we had several senior officials testify on Capitol Hill. And what our special envoy for the Great Lakes, Tom Perriello, specifically said is that the type of behavior that leads to a violent crackdown and repression of freedom of expression is potentially a cause for the U.S. to consider sanctions. And so that is another tool that I think has been made very clear as something that ought to be considered as part of the overall approach, depending on whether violence starts to break out, whether repression begins to happen in a more significant way, and whether we really truly lose the ability to hold elections in a manner in which the Constitution lays it out.
But over time, one of the things that has been apparent is that the country is fairly splintered. With all these armed groups in different regions of the DRC, Are there conditions really for a free and fair democratic election?
Well, I mean, I certainly take your point, and that's one of the reasons why we have a UN stabilization peacekeeping mission that's there. I think things have improved. In fact, I was both in Kinshasa, but I was also in Goma, which is in the eastern part of the DRC, and one of the places that has had a significant amount of the unrest and violence historically that you're describing. I think we can't let that be used as an excuse not to hold elections. I think the people of the Congo are really calling for it. They're hungry for it. I spoke to many people in Goma, many people in Kinshasa, and in my course of my work in Washington, people come through all the time. And the uniform message is hold these elections in a peaceful way, make sure that they're legitimate, and do so in a timely manner.
How about those who say, well, even before we talk about elections, about holding responsible or holding to account those who have violated and grossly violated the rights, the human rights of the people of Congo, including children?
Yeah. I mean, those are ongoing parallel efforts, and I think one should not necessarily dictate the other. In fact, one of the best ways to bring about the kind of accountability and justice that you're mentioning and to put in place the type of reforms that are needed is to hold elections and to have new leadership that will take this on as part of their new mandate. That's why we have elections in the United States and many other countries, because sometimes the tough issues, you need fresh eyes. And then that's why the principle of democratic succession is so important to us.
Yeah. The entire region seems to be kind of slowly veering towards a kind of this extension of term limits, and people are concerned about Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda. It's all concentrated in the same area. How much concern is there over a possible effort to do the same, and how will that play up in terms of the stability of the entire region?
Right. Well, I think it's a good question, and frankly, what has happened in Burundi, I think, serves as a very important warning for what potentially could happen in the Congo if the right steps aren't taken to secure free and fair elections in a timely manner. As we've seen in Burundi, when you have one person who decides to put themselves ahead of the Constitution and ahead of their people and the country, and to hold on to power at all costs, and to use security forces to commit gross human rights violations, as we've seen, the results are catastrophic. So my hope is that we will not see the same thing in the Congo, that the government, that the security forces, and certainly President Kabila will make the right choices that they have indicated at times that they will make when it comes to respecting the Constitution and holding elections. But no one can guarantee what will happen and what kind of dire consequences will result if decisions are made to follow the precedent that Burundi has unfortunately set at this moment.
Some have raised issues about the West, the U.S., and the powerful nations of this world. They say they seem to be more concerned about maintaining a state of stability and therefore not pushing so hard on the area of justice, because it might include forcing people out of power, which could destabilize the area. How do you balance those two?
I mean, I think at this point, there's a very clear principle that the President of the United States has laid out, especially at the African Union last summer, where he said what is most important is democratic succession and making sure that the voice of the people is heard. And that, for too long, in terms of our foreign policy in the past, we have sometimes looked at the trade-offs between stability and democracy. But really, the way we see it is that it's not a trade-off. They are part of the same package, that they are linked in the sense that the longer you have one person in power, where power is concentrated, the more that the stability of the country is dependent on that one person. And what happens, I would ask, when that person eventually departs? No one lives forever, and at that point, where does your democracy, where does your country go? When you have a true democratic succession principles in place, and you have institutions that can guarantee that the transition will happen in a way that will maintain stability, that, I think, is the best way to bring both principles to bear, and that is the principles that we are supporting as a country.
Yes. In your assessment, has there been progress in the area of democracy in the last few years, or is the region, particularly that region, right there where it was a few years ago, or even going backwards?
I think it's hard to generalize. I think we've seen certain areas and countries that have made a lot of progress. So one place that I would point to, which we all are very, very pleased and are encouraging of, is Nigeria, where we had really great elections last year. You saw a change in power from the ruling party to the opposition, and we're seeing some important reforms and steps being taken by President Buhari. And we've seen other good elections happen, including in Cote d'Ivoire and so forth. But I think your point is a valid one, especially in the Great Lakes region. we're seeing, I think we're seeing some backsliding, frankly, whether it's across the river in the Republic of the Congo, Congo-Brazzaville, and some of the efforts there to change the constitution by President Sassou Nguesso, whether we're looking at Burundi, whether we're looking at recent efforts by President Kagame in Rwanda to change the constitution as well. These are all things that we are closely watching and that we have indicated concern in public statements and other efforts. And then, of course, Uganda as well, and the current efforts right now and the questions about the legitimacy of the elections. Those are all things that we are watching closely and engaging in terms of saying which way will democracy go in the region.
Well, Secretary Feldstein, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Vincent. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah. Well, Stephen Feldstein is the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor.